Hello lovely people and welcome back to my channel. You're probably wondering and thinking to yourself, Maria, why are you making this video when about a month ago you told us you were not going to buy this palette in this video? FOMO. Nothing more to it. FOMO. Pat McGrath was like, yeah, this palette is going to be like an extremely limited edition thing, and I don't know, if you want it, pick it up now, otherwise you may never get another chance. And I got the real FOMO, you guys, because it's Pat McGrath and I adore her Mothership palettes, and I just had this like little voice in my head saying, yeah, but what if you regret not picking it up later and then you're really going to hate yourself for it? So I purchased it. Frankly, I'm not even going to make excuses for myself because you're allowed to judge me. Frankly, I judge me too. And with that being said, let's just move into a few thoughts that I have about the launch of this palette. The launch of this product was about the weirdest makeup product launch I've ever experienced. It was more like an Easter egg hunt. I don't know whether Mother was trying to be witty and playful with us, or whether something was like not quite done properly, because, okay, the word that comes to my mind when I think about the release of this palette is misplaced. Misplaced. Not the right time for it, especially now in the context of the Star Wars release. If you guys didn't know that, I'm going to also give you a few thoughts on that because I really can't help myself. Today, as I am filming this video, it is the 13th of December, Friday the 13th, she's releasing a collab with Star Wars, which I don't mind, you know. I absolutely do not hate Pat McGrath for releasing a collab with Star Wars. On the contrary, I love it. I love Pat McGrath, I love Star Wars. Seems like she loves Star Wars as well, so I see nothing wrong. Are they both going to cash in majorly from this? Yes, of course. But you know, that's what businesses are for. They want to make money. With that being said, I do think the Star Wars release is awesome. As someone who owns a lot of Pat McGrath products, this launch is slightly disappointing for me because it is a lot of re-releases. So it's products that are already in her lineup but in new fancy Star Wars packaging. I'm really happy for everyone who is going to pick up the Decadence palette because they missed on it. I personally am not going to pick up the Decadence palette or any of the other items. The only one that I want to pick up is the Dark Galaxy palette, so one of the 6 mini palettes, because I feel like that one brings the most new shades to the table, and the only one that doesn't seem to have repeat shades, because the other small palette, the one with C-3PO, while it's the cutest thing ever and I would have really liked to own it, has several repeats. One of them being that gold standard shade, which is also in the Decadence palette. So for those of you who are going to pick up the Decadence palette, have picked up the Opulence collection from last year and are planning on picking up the C-3PO palette, you're literally going to have 3 gold standard eyeshadows in your collection. Gold standard is gorgeous, but do you really need 3 of them? Anyway, just to like get off that tangent and go back to what I was originally talking about, the Star Wars release makes a lot of sense to me. However, the Divine Rose release makes absolutely no sense to me. So I've heard rumors that Divine Rose is going to come back in early 2020. And you know what? With this packaging and this color story, don't you think this would have been a beautiful, perfect, smashing Valentine's Day release? Now, I don't give a tiny rat's ass for Valentine's Day because we in Europe don't really celebrate much Valentine's Day. We sort of picked it up over the years, but it's really not a thing around here. But in the US it is, and I think a Valentine's Day release for a palette with this color story, with this packaging called Divine Rose, would have been sublime, to put it in Mother's own words. It would have made so much more sense also in the timeline of her releases, because she released Midnight Sun in September. In October we got the new Opulence collection, nothing wrong with that, but that came with 3 quads. Now in the end of December we are getting the Star Wars collection, which features again 3 eyeshadow palettes, and sometime in between, just all of a sudden, without any warning, in super limited quantities, we got the Divine Rose. So this release makes no sense to me. If she had released Divine Rose in February in 2020, that would have made so much more sense to me, because it would have given some time for everyone who enjoys Pat McGrath to, you know, enjoy a little bit the things that I have picked up so far, being the Midnight Sun or the Opulence collection or both, and then in December, you know, enjoy the release of the movie together with the release of the collection. And then in early 2020, 6 months after the release of Midnight Sun, her new Mothership palette, we would have gotten a new Mothership palette, so the Divine Rose, because I don't really count the Decadence palette as a real Mothership palette release, because it is a re-release of an eyeshadow palette which she has already had. So we would not be getting a new Mothership palette for a whole of 6 months, which I feel like is an appropriate time between two of her big expensive palettes. So to me, that pre-release or like early release or misplaced release of the Divine Rose palette made little to no sense, and it also brought a lot of panic to people who like Pat McGrath products, because so she dropped it on Selfridges without any warning. It sold out like this, then it came back on Selfridges once again without any warning, and it also came on her website, gone within a day as well. So a lot of people who like didn't have the money to purchase those palettes on those days did not manage to get this palette. And I don't believe this is going to be a super limited edition palette, you guys, because look at this color story. This is the first color story Pat McGrath has released without any intimidating color in the palette. So far, all of her eyeshadow palettes, the Subliminal, the Sublime, the Subversive palette, the Midnight Sun palette, have all had those like intimidating pops of color to whom a lot of people purchasing these palettes would not have been very advantageous, because they would be like, okay, I'm going to spend $125, but I'm actually not going to use all the shades in this palette. If this was a cheaper palette, okay, leave it or take it. But for such an expensive palette, you really want to make sure you're going to use all the 10 shades. So I can imagine why a lot of people haven't picked up Mothership palettes before, and why a lot of people said this might be my first Mothership palette. Because look at it, it is the epitome of neutral feminine, and on top of that, one of the most clever combinations of warm and cool tones that I have ever seen. This is, I feel like, where Mother's genius really shines through. I really think this is one of the most well executed palettes that has neutrals combining cool tones and warm tones. It's genius, okay? I would never have thought of putting this shade together with this shade in a palette, or thought that they would work together. But they do. Normally when I receive a Mothership palette, I really cannot wait to use it on camera, and I pretty much film something in the, you know, in the lines of first impressions and demo kind of video, because I know already prior to even opening the package that I'm going to love the palette. But in this particular case, because this is not exactly my color story and I wasn't really sure whether I was going to really love the palette, I took my time to get to know it, to use it a lot, and to really get a feel of what can you achieve with this eyeshadow palette, how the different eyeshadows perform, how they pair together, all of that good stuff. So I wanted to start off by saying that I really like this color story, but I don't love it. I don't love it in the way that I love all of my other Mothership palettes. That's not to say that I regret purchasing it, not at all, because I think this eyeshadow palette really has its place. I've made quite a lot of looks with this palette at this point, and I have always gotten very light colored, day appropriate looks. While with her other palettes, especially something like the Subversive palette for instance, I open it, I do a look, and I'm like, how did we go into such a dramatic smoky eye all of a sudden? So with a lot of her other palettes, you can go very light, you can go very dramatic, but you have that option. With this eyeshadow palette, I really feel like you almost really, it's made to be used during the day, it's made to be used for people who want to wear office appropriate makeup, but want to step it up a notch in terms of a formula and feel a bit more special by wearing Pat McGrath eyeshadows. I think the Divine Rose palette will also make a beautiful combo together with the Ritualistic Rose quad that she released for holidays. In one of her Instagram posts, she actually called Ritualistic Rose the little sister of the Divine Rose, which makes me think, are we going to get bigger sisters of Iconic Illumination and Nocturnal Nirvana? Was she alluding to something, or she was just, you know, playing with the word rose? Anyway, I just wanted to say, these two make a beautiful combination, and if you like these tones, these like rosy, lightweight tones, and you want something that is not as expensive and you want more of the topper shade experience, I would definitely advise you to pick up Ritualistic Rose, because Ritualistic Rose is actually still available. A few very quick thoughts on the outer packaging. The outer packaging is the standard cardboard with the little stringy thing here that you open up. So classic Pat McGrath, nothing different about it. It is absolutely beautiful. It is actually a new type of packaging in her lineup, especially compared to Midnight Sun, which was like about 95% similar to Bronze Seduction. I do really love the beautiful roses. So the color story of this outer packaging really reflects also the color story of the inside of the palette, which I really like. And I think generally speaking she has been quite good with what's on the outside reflecting what's on the inside, not necessarily always like very accurate, but in this case it is very accurate. I do love the beautiful details here with the roses, the little gems here. This lady face here is one of my favorite like images on a packaging from Pat McGrath. I call it the Silence of the Lambs packaging because it really gives me Silence of the Lambs vibes. For those of you who thought this is a completely new design, it's actually not. I'm pretty sure this detail we have also seen on her Sublime palette, but like magnified. Anyway, I want to move into the swatches. What I'm going to do is I'm going to swatch each shade and I'm going to tell you what I think about it. I'm going to go into this direction, so I'm going to start with the upper row and go into this direction and end with the topper shades, and I'm going to do the same for the bottom row. So the first shade we have is Skin Show Nude. Skin Show Nude is sort of like a champagne highlighting shade. Beware, this shade comes back in her Subliminal palette, so if you own the Subliminal palette this is going to be a duplicated shade for you. But I am going to point out, I feel like this shade has a better texture to it. I have this general feeling with a lot of her shadows that she has stepped up her formula and it's even better than what it used to be. The second shade is a matte shade, and it is one of the most unique and beautiful matte shades that I have ever seen in my life. This is the shade Velouria. Velouria is a very cool-toned, mauvey pink lilac shade. It looks very cool-toned, but it is not unflattering, and it actually has just the tiniest bit of warmth to it, so it doesn't make you look like you are a character from, you know, The Walking Dead or something. It is really stunning. And what I wanted to especially point out about her mattes, the matte shadows of Pat McGrath normally do not swatch very well. However, since Midnight Sun, I think she has stepped up her matte eyeshadow formula and they feel even creamier, they even swatch beautifully. They still blend out, both in her like older formula and her newer formula, just fine. They're very pigmented, very easy to blend out, but I feel like they're even creamier now than they used to be. Moving on to the next shade, this is the shade Sable Bronze. Sable Bronze is a standard metallic shade with gorgeous pigmentation, beautiful reflect. This is not a very unique shade, it is not a repeat shade, but it is also not exactly very unique, especially if you compare it to that very similar shade she has in the Midnight Sun palette. Now I want to swatch the two topper shades for you. The first one is Refined Gold 002. Refined Gold 002 is one of her very smooth metallic topper shades. I was slightly disappointed in this shade, the reason being that we have like bazillion and one golds from Pat at this point, and this was marketed as a gold with pink reflex to it. I don't really see the pink reflex. I really wish this shade had visible pink glitter in it, because I think it would have been absolutely stunning and very unique for her lineup if it had that effect. The next shade, this is the shade Iridescent Pink 003. Iridescent Pink 003 is technically not a repeat shade from her eyeshadow palettes, but it is in her highlighter trio. So if you guys have her highlighter trio, beware, because you have this shade already. This shade is stunning. This is one of my absolute favorite shades in this palette. It is very smooth, very soft, white with a pink copper sort of duochrome. It is really stunning. It transforms whatever you put it on. I just really love this shade. And now let's move on to the bottom row, where the first shade I want to swatch for you is Extreme Mahogany. Extreme Mahogany is a brown red tinged matte shade. It is really stunning. The only thing I wanted to say about this shade, while I do love these sort of like red toned browns, I find myself craving for a more cool toned brown in this palette, because I think that cool toned brown would have worked so nicely with this shade, with this shade. I don't know, I find myself wanting to have a cool toned brown in this eyeshadow palette, and I have to work with Extreme Mahogany, and even though I like Extreme Mahogany, I find myself wanting to reach for another palette which has a more cool toned brown in it. I don't know whether anyone else had that feeling with this shade, or am I the only one? The next shade is one of my favorites and one of the most unique shades definitely that I own in my collection. This is the shade Lovelace. Lovelace is sort of so it's a metallic shade, it's in her standard metallic shade formula. It is a chameleon. It shifts between like a taupey, bronzy, brown with somewhat pink undertones to it. Moving on, next up we have the shade Rose Dusk. Rose Dusk is in her more satin metallic formula, so it's not as reflective and as metallic as, for instance, Lovelace and the Sable Bronze shade, but it is a gorgeous shade. This shade, by the way, is a repeat from her Sublime palette. What I love doing with this shade is mixing it up with Velouria sometimes when I want to give Velouria somewhat warmer undertones. And let's swatch the last two shades, which are also the two topper shades on the bottom row. This gorgeous thing here is again one of the most unique things that I have seen. This shade is called VR Rose Venus. VR Rose Venus has a very intense like pink coral base to it and a very strong golden green duochrome. The only thing I wanted to say about this shade is, while I love the duochrome and I love the texture of this shade and I think it's a really beautiful shade, personally I would have preferred it if it was glittery. If it was if it was like the same texture as the next shade I'm going to swatch for you, I would have preferred this shade to be even more intense than it is now. But I can understand that if she wanted to make this eyeshadow for people who are afraid of duochromes so that it's a bit more subdued, I can understand why it has this texture, but I would have preferred even more pow glittery. And let's watch the last shade in this palette, and that is the shade Astral Solstice. Astral Solstice, as you can also see, has a very, very chunky texture to it. It's very glittery. That being said, it applies very smoothly, so I don't find it a difficult shade to work with. I really, really love it. This is a repeat shade from Midnight Sun. I personally really like this shade. It is cool tone, so it works really well with the rest of the tones in this palette. But you can definitely layer this shade over the more warm toned metallic shades in this palette and you're still going to get a very nice effect. So even though by itself this shade has very cool tones to it and you would not think that it pairs very well with the warm tones, it actually does. And there you have it, guys. Swatches of the beautiful Divine Rose palette. I think this is pretty much all I wanted to say about this palette. I'm going to now leave you with the very short demo for the look that I'm wearing on my eyes right now. Yeah, if you were only here for the review and the swatches, thanks so much for watching. And if you wanted to see the rest of the video, then I guess keep on watching. I started the look off with this beautiful dark brown mahogany shade. I deposited most of the color onto my outer corner and then I brought it up into my crease and blended it out with a soft blender brush. You can see it takes some time to blend out this shadow, not because the eyeshadow is difficult to blend, but just because I need to really take my time with it due to how dark it is for my personal skin tone. Then I whipped out my glitter glue because I really cannot apply my metallic shades without the glitter glue. I just think they work best that way. And I went into this beautiful browny bronzy shade over here, which I used on the outer part of my lid and brought it more or less like 2/3 of the way in. Then onto the inner part of the lid I applied the topper shade, one of the topper shades anyway. This is the gold shade. Because I wanted to give it a bit of a pink hue, I applied this shade, the highlighting white pink duochrome shade. I wanted to add a bit of sparkle, so I dipped a tiny bit into the Astral Solstice glittery topper shade and I applied that mostly onto the center of my lid. Into my inner corners I applied the Skin Show Nude Divine shade, and then over top of that just a tiny bit of this pink duochrome highlighter shade. Just to highlight a little bit the waterline, I applied a Kiko eyeshadow stick in a sort of like champagne color, and then underneath on my lower lash line I used again the bronze shade, and just to slightly deepen it up into the outer part of the lower lash line I applied again the deep mahogany brown shade. Just to quickly finish it off, I wanted to let you know that the highlighter that you see on my skin is actually a combination of two shades from this palette. So since this shade originally was in a highlighter palette, and I think the formula of this is pretty similar to what's in her highlighter trio, I have used it a couple of times as a highlighter and I do really love it. It has this gorgeous like pinky coppery shift to it, but sometimes I find the pink shift a bit too stark for my skin tone. I do have this highlighter shade just the tiniest bit here underneath my actual brow, just on the brow arch, and I do love it, but it is quite there. Like I said, because it is such a stark pink, sometimes I want to tone it down. So what I tried this time around was actually applying this gold shade here first as a highlighter, and I'm here to tell you this works beautifully as a highlighter if you just want a gold highlighter. But what I do is I mix these two, so I apply this one as a base and then I apply the pink duochrome shade over top of that, and that trick sort of tones down the really stark pink duochrome of that highlighter, and what you end up with is this beautiful like light gold, light pink duochrome highlighter on your cheekbones, and I absolutely love it. I don't know whether it's coming across on camera, but it is really beautiful. Trust me, if you have this palette, you should definitely try this little trick. I stuck with Pat McGrath also on my lips. I'm wearing the lipstick, the Luxe Trans lipstick in the shade She Is Heaven, which is a gorgeous My Lips but better kind of color. It's one of my favorite lipsticks from Pat McGrath, especially like the more neutral nude sort of colors. And over top of that I have one of my newest Pat McGrath purchases. This is a Black Friday purchase. This is the lip gloss in the shade Ellie Angelic, which I'm not sure you can see has the most beautiful pink shifting reflex to it. I really hope my camera is sort of catching the reflex on this gloss, because it is absolutely beautiful. I really hope you guys enjoyed the look, my review of this palette and all the thoughts that I had surrounding this launch. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you get a chance to hang out again soon. Bye!